we obviously had the attention span for something like this that is not linear, that is not plot driven. We can, yes, it's, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes with everybody. And it's not just 5 minutes, but it's just small amounts of time.
Right.
But we can follow that. It's a different type of storytelling that the core audience for this movie had no trouble following. And that was one thing we talked about because, like I said, when I saw this movie, I did see it with a class and we discussed it as a class the next day after we went to the theater to see it. And one of the questions we asked ourselves was, when did we stop hoping for a plot? It's like, when did we realize there wasn't going to be a plot? And when did we stop hoping for one?
Welcome to Certain POVs, Another Past podcast with Case and Sam. This week is a 5th episode, so we're talking about a movie that overcame adversity. Let's celebrate the creativity of the filmmakers.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Another Past podcast. I'm Case Aiken, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Alisea.
Hi!
Hey Sam, welcome back to the show.
Yay!
So today we are doing a 5th episode, which means that we are talking about a movie that is not the usual format of the show of talking about a movie that is fascinating but flawed. Today we are talking about a movie that is good. And so that means that we are talking about a movie that doesn't normally fit the kind of format that we would do on the show. Today's entry is a really weird one, I would say. It doesn't normally fit what people would describe as normal movies, because today we are talking about the 1990 Richard Linklater film Slacker. And to have that conversation, from Gold Standard and Drunk Cinema, we're joined by Xan Sprouse.
And her cat. I apologize if you can hear him. Thanks for having me. I love this movie, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this movie too. I have owned this movie, I think, since college. Like, I think that's when I got the DVD. I have not watched it until getting ready for this podcast.
Okay.
And I don't know fully why, but I think it has something to do with it just being this sort of like legendary movie in my mind. Like, it was a movie that inspired Kevin Smith, and he was like very vocal about that being an inspirational movie for him. I was a big fan of other Linklater movies, and it was just like, I don't know if I want to go back and see the prototype. Like, I'm good with where he is, and I guess I was just like a little bit scared, and so it was fun for me to go and actually watch this, but like, it's just so weird that I hadn't.
I could see that though, because there are times when a movie is so built up in your mind that you feel like you need to be in the absolute right mood to watch it. And all of the variables have to be perfect. You have to be awake enough and comfortable enough, and nothing else is on your mind. And everything just has to be perfect for you to feel like you can
Yeah.
sit and give it the attention that the buildup makes you feel like it probably deserves.
Exactly. Yeah, the buildup is exactly right. Like, this is a heavy movie from the perspective of, oh, it's got this like cachet of cultural power behind it all. Always was a little intimidated by it, and that's interesting. It's sort of, I don't know, what are your experiences, Sam? You're our co-host. What were your normal experiences with this movie?
Actually, this is one of those movies that kind of like slipped through the cracks for me. I think that I was like a little too young when it came out, but then, it was something that I heard talked about, but it wasn't something that I felt that I had to go back and watch, like and watching this in preparation for this podcast, it was really like kind of this weird, fun, depressing trip down memory lane, thinking of the generation that was just a little bit older than me, like my friends, like brothers and sisters, and this like generation that just kind of felt lost in this recession, and unfortunately feeling the parallels of our world today, and feeling like we haven't really gotten very far. We just have more ways of meeting up with people, but then maybe not connecting with them in real life. So this was like a really trippy experiment for me because it felt like something I had always known, even though I didn't grow up like anywhere in a small town in Texas, right? But it felt like something like I had known because I had lived through the era, but I was too young to feel as directionless as the people in the film may have felt, as well as hopeful as they had felt. And then feeling a little bit of like, oh God, we've we've not gotten that far. So there was like a little bit of like, oh no,
Yeah,
this still
no,
feels very fresh. This feels very present. This feels like something we're still examining, just in different context a little bit.
yeah, no, it sounds like you had a similar experience to me where this movie feels like nostalgia. This is the thing that Linklater does. He has a way of making you nostalgic for a time that you didn't necessarily live, but it's one that he was nostalgic for in his own way, and does a really good job of like capturing moments. So I think you and I are in similar beats here. Xan, how about you? You're our guest. Like, what was your exposure to this movie?
You guys are making me feel old, which I knew was going to happen when I came on this podcast with you. I saw this when it came out. I saw it in the theater. And I'm about 5 to 10 years younger than the characters we see in the movie here. I saw this in high school, and a group of us went to see this movie with an English class we were taking at the time of subversive literature and writers and that type of different ways of storytelling. So we all went as a class after school, and I remember all of us watching it and having the reaction of not fully relating to it, because these are older kids. They are in college, they're on their own, they live in their own apartments and have more adult problems than we did, but we definitely got it. Living where I live in Columbus, Ohio, in a university town, this idea of being able to walk down the street at any given time and see any given number of different types of young people with different types of ambitions and opinions and interests and different levels of weirdness and even criminality. If you think about the hit and run guy,
Yeah, yeah.
the that aspect of this movie definitely resonated with us, because even as high schoolers, it was so cool to hang out on campus and, go into the independent bookstores and, see bands, all the stuff that they do in this movie. But also, as I look back on this movie, and you're right, this is something that Linklater is very, very good at. The the fact that this movie takes place at the time that it is being filmed, unlike something like, say, Dazed and Confused, that was released. I've always thought Dazed and Confused is very interesting because it was released the same year that the kids who were born the year the movie took place are now the age of the kids in the movie. So kids who were born in 1976 were leaving their junior year, going into their senior year, just like the kids in the movie when it was in 1993 when it happened.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that was an interesting parallel. But this movie takes place in 1989, 1990, and it's filmed at that time as well. And it does a very good job of capturing this era of Gen X, because we had previously seen the things that we sort of tend to think of with Gen X as kids, things like E.T. and Goonies and that kind of thing. But then there was also that elder Gen X, younger boomer era of like Bret Easton Ellis and Tamma Janowitz and those types of characters, those sort of kids in college who are going to business school to be millionaires, but also doing too much cocaine, but they're still kind of directionless. But then you get to this early 90s, late 80s period where the cocaine is sort of burned out. And now what do we do? And this is an interesting time period in history, too, because we're right on the cusp of what we consider the 90s. You know, the 80s have ended, and we're still, every decade, as soon as it ends, tries to find its way of where it's going to go next. And I think a lot of us who are Gen X and who grew up in this time period think that the 90s kind of began when Nirvana's Nevermind was released, when that kind of gave us this whole slackery, grungy type of mainstream exposure. And so the fact that this movie does such a good job of
it gave the zeitgeist an anthem.
it did, it really did. And it just, and
Yeah.
it's sort of a demarcation period of like this, you know, up until then we were sort of floating around ideas, but then no, boom, this is where we were going. And so we really got how this movie was trying to show that directionlessness isn't I'm trying to even think of the word. Directionless isn't necessarily idleness. You know, all of these people who seem to have no direction and no jobs and no idea of what to do, their minds are still constantly moving. They're still constantly trying to do things and doing things and figuring things out and trying to be creative and trying to go from there. Even the people who are just laying around their apartment together are constantly talking and constantly having theories and ideas about the world. And so that even with what looks to the outside to be a generation of slackers, they can still be incredibly fascinating and interesting and entertaining people. And
Yeah.
this movie really showed us that and really kind of gave us not just a visual for an identity, but also a cautionary tale. You know, you don't want to be jobless trying to get people to come to your band, and you don't want to be the girl that everybody knows just got out of the mental hospital, and you don't want to be the guy that does the hit and run, and you don't want to have a roommate that just leaves and puts cryptic postcards on the floor, and you don't want the boyfriend that is just contrarian. And if you're going to write a book about Kennedy, write it, don't talk about it for 6 years. That kind of
Right.
that kind of cautionary tale, but at the same time creating this visibility of we're not the worst thing in the world, we just don't know what's next, and it's okay to not know what's next. Sorry, I know I said a lot there.
Yeah, no, you did.
No.
I'm like I'm trying to think about like the best place to respond here. You know, because I knew that we would have this sort of specific generational divide, like you pointed out. Now, like it's not that extreme. We should note Sam and I are both in our 40s,
Yeah.
but in terms of, but we're firmly in the elder millennial camp as opposed to the Gen X.
That's the thing. We're all in our 40s, but
Yeah.
I still could have babysat you guys.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's that break. It's the Gen X to millennial break right there that we're apparently butting up in a
Yeah.
way that I don't normally see happen in our conversations.
To be fair, we're usually on the older side.
Yes.
Chase and I are usually the people who are going, well, in our day.
Well, and I don't even necessarily feel that much older. It's just more that I saw this movie when it came out is what makes me, and you talking about, I was a
Right.
little young when it first came out, and I was like, no, I went with school, dude.
You know, I think it's also interesting because there is this thing like when you are, you know, between grade school, junior high, and high school, like it's such a vastly different world for you as a kid, right? So when it's 4 years, 2 years, even is a vast difference between people until you get older, right? Oscar Wilde said everyone's the same age after 25.
Absolutely. I mean, now 2 years feels like last week, whereas when I was 12,
Right,
2 years
exactly.
Was a
a
huge amount of
huge
time.
amount
Yeah.
of growth and learning and knowing about who I am, and just even the expectations of who I was. You know, 2 years ago, you were a kid, and now they're trying to tell you that you need to pick colleges. Yeah, it's a big
Right,
deal when
yeah.
you're a kid, those, 2-year marks.
I want to point out that this type of conversation is exactly the kind of conversation I want to be having when we're discussing Slacker, because it's not like the kind of movie where we can have like a whole conversation about like, well, here's the plot of this movie. Like it's structure more than anything else. And so it's really interesting the the generational kind of aspect that it awakens in our conversation, just because the whole point of this movie is just to like open up weird conversations and just be kind of weird and fun for the sake of doing something kind of interesting and cool, the way that Linklater likes to do movies that are like interesting and cool when you talk about it.
Exactly. This is not a movie that we can talk about from beginning, middle to end. It just spirals in
Yeah.
on itself. And so this movie is more about how it makes you feel and who resonates with you and what seems familiar and what seems outlandish. And one of the best things about it is that none of it seemed unrealistic to me. That even the people I don't necessarily relate to, I still find them extremely realistic because I've either known or known somebody who knew somebody exactly like everybody in this movie.
Yeah, no, it's definitely like this like nouveau cinema verite kind of going on here. Like we are presenting as realistic a world that we are all going to experience, even though it's just weird as shit. Like the conversations that we have, the people that are there. I had this slogan in my mind, which is that this movie is Keep Austin Weird, the movie.
Kind of absolutely that's what this is. Because, even when you think about, Keep Austin Weird being a playoff of course, Keep Portland Weird, and you think about something like Portlandia, when you watch the first episode of Portlandia and they have that song, The Dream of the 90s is alive in Portland. This is the dream of the 90s that they're talking about at the beginning of Portlandia. It's this, where we don't actually have to do anything. We just have to be our weird selves. This movie is that dream that Fred Armisen was talking about when he did that song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of that is the culture of Austin that we should talk about in terms of like I feel like the circumstances that created this movie almost explain the movie itself. Like, so Richard Linklater was part of this community of, I don't want to say ne'er-do-wells, like slackers, like that's the term here. This was a period where in Austin it wasn't particularly expensive to live, and so people had reasonably it was a recession, but it created a situation where there was a lot of like underemployment as opposed to unemployment, but they could still pay rent, which sort of created this community of like artists and so forth that was living in this overlapping space on top of a college town, on top of people who had like professional lives. And then they also note that there was a mental ward not too far from all of this. So you never really knew where people were coming from, is sort of the whole like spiel about Austin at this time. I'm sorry, I lost my thread there. Sorry.
I felt like you were onto something too.
I thought so too. And then I just like completely I checked back my notes and I was like, what the fuck was I saying? I'm sorry.
It's kind of like the movie.
I was going to say this is perfect.
Eventually.
This is the perfect theme for this particular conversation.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like our Groundhog's Day episode where Sam just kept getting disconnected throughout and us restarting the episode every single time. The fifth episodes are weird in that way. Yeah, so Slacker is like a movie that doesn't have a plot because it's a movie about a time and a place that didn't have necessarily like an inciting incident or anything. It was just sort of an ethos, man. Like it was a place where people could kind of work and kind of do their thing. They could kind of do. It's similar for like my equated experience would be like the hipster movement in Brooklyn, where people were employed but like also just doing like their stuff the whole period there. So Linklater comes up in this environment, and it always brings up like he started the Austin Film Society, which until I watched this movie and like was like watching behind the scenes stuff, I didn't like understand. This was just a guy and his friends like renting out like a Super 8 player or like a 16mm player and like watching movies on like the weekends or like during off hours kind of things at a theater. It's wild to sort of see the amount of gravitas that is thrown on this because Linklater has this huge reputation that he would then go on from like, and in addition to Linklater himself, like there's the knock-on effects that we talk about, like the various people who were inspired by Linklater. This is part of that early 90s Miramax kind of wave. I don't think this was Miramax though. This was the Criterion Collection is on the release. What is this? Sony, sorry, who actually picked it up and released it. So it's the scrappy I think I can kind of movie that was created by a bunch of scrappy I think I can kind of people is I guess what I'm trying to like get at as the final like thesis about this. Like the environment that created this movie feels really fucking young and really like inspiring. Like I think back to like my theater days, like doing like off Broadway theater with like we weren't really making any money on our show, but we just wanted to do art for the sake of doing art. And this movie is like kind of an example of it. And then it's successful because it has like 100 fucking people in the cast. And so word of mouth was like crazy good for this whole thing. And it got a lot of bodies in the seats to see the movie that they were all in and that their friends were in. And so it did really well in that regard, telling the story of like 100 people just sort of doing their thing, existing in a really weird time and place.
That's exactly what it is. And I think this movie, for me at least, gave me an appreciation for these sort of smaller scale movies about just people and just weirdos. And I think it definitely set a tone for the 90s for that, because
Yeah.
you go along and you go on and you have movies like, say, something like Motorama or Ruben and Ed, where it's just you're just coming in contact with just weird, eccentric people. And yeah, there's sort of a common thread to it, but the interesting part is the people that 10, 20 years ago you would pitch, like, let's make a movie about this kind of person. And they would say, what the hell are you talking about? When you think about something like back in the 70s, we started to have movies like this with something like Midnight Cowboy, where you just have, weird people doing their thing in their weird little small world. And, we kind of get excited about that. And then, and then we're like, no, let's, it wins an Oscar. And then we're like, no, let's go back to normal movies, either, epics or action or war movies or dramas. It's hard to stomach this, I think, sometimes for a bigger audience who is interested in, movies as an escape, as a release, and to have just, your your weirdo idiot kid neighbors on screen probably isn't all that interesting for everybody. But it started to become interesting, like I said, in the 90s, where you had movies like this. Like, you think about something like Clerks. That's a day in the life of a guy that works at a convenience store.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Because you were talking earlier about this movie inspiring Kevin Smith. And it is interesting to watch that movie. These are entertaining people, and this is entertaining stuff that happens. And this movie shows us that audiences will watch stories like that, and also a plot is not necessary. I mean, this is so character driven, but not in a way that we usually think of something as being character driven, because it's just a bunch of characters and you get maybe 3 to 5 minutes with them. And then you see how they go from one person to another, and how, first of all, even back then, the world is kind of small. You start with one guy, and by the end, you're a completely different place, and you've gone through this town. This is a day in this town that you're walking through with this, and you're getting so many different experiences and so many things going on in this day. And the movie tells you at the beginning that life is based on every single little tiny, seemingly insignificant choice that we make in our everyday lives. That if I had just done this could have been different. And if I had done that, I would have never met this person. And oh man, I should have stayed back at the bus station. I love that.
Right.
But the
Yeah.
movie sort of tells you that life is a meandering series of choices and characters. And here's an entertaining slice of that.
Yeah, and we haven't called enough attention to the structure of the movie, and you brought this up, the fact that it's a day and some change in the life of just the city of Austin. It kind of reminds me of those like cityscape kind of movies that were popular in the silent going into the early talkies, movies that would be just like, here's what a city looks like, just in case you're ever wondering what Berlin was like as a movie, kind of things. But instead of being focused on the architecture and the sort of hustle and bustle of the city, it's focused on the weird people. It's each of these like little vignettes and snippets that we move on from are structured to be, you know, there's supposed to be some kind of a handoff. It's like a herald to a certain degree, except it never comes around. so I don't want to make too strong a comparison to a herald on that one. you don't bring it back together in this one on purpose. Like, this movie is just an endless marathon or a relay race of just like handing off the scene to the next one and go and go and go. In some cases more abstract ways, but in some ways it's just very simple. Like, a person enters a scene and then someone else in the scene exits and we follow that person, kind of stuff. And in doing so, we get all these various vignettes. Like you said, Xan, like, it's hard to say necessarily like what the structure is. It's just, here are the ones that I liked in it, and here, like, the ones that stand out to me, like the weird dude talking about how we were on Mars in the 60s. I really enjoyed that guy. The guy with the screen on his back, I really enjoyed that guy. You know, like the like all of these elements of it just sort of like pop out. Like, I found that rewatching the trailer today was like really fun, just to be like, yeah, all of these weird fuckers, like, that's fun.
It is just, there are little things that just resonate with you and stick with you because of the absurdity of it. For example, after we saw this movie I was a sophomore, I think, when I saw this, and maybe sophomore or freshman, I can't remember which, but we walked around school, all of us going, you should quit. 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 I should know. I am a medical doctor. I own a mansion and a yacht. We said that all the time. And then there are the ones that sort of resonate with young people that are trying to find meaning and ceremony with everything. You know, I absolutely adore the guys on the bridge, as much as I hate that they're throwing stuff in the water. They crack me up so much. You know, they have the one guy who is angrier than his broken up friend is about the situation, and they're just trying to add ceremony to everything. I don't want to get rid of the typewriter. You have to. That's why we brought it. And just, you know, everything that every little piece of meaning that they're adding to these items. You know, she fucked a lot of guys in these tent. She's not going to fuck any more guys in this tent. And it's just also ridiculous. Like, it's a perfectly fine typewriter and tent. Just keep it, dude. It's fine. Or then even when I think a lot of us had known somebody like this, and I went on to know several people like this. One of the guys from the group on the bridge who goes and then meets his girlfriend, and they're about to go see a movie, and then she just winds up yelling at him for being a contrarian.
Yeah.
I love that scene so much, because I've known so many people who are like that are just, you know, his whole, we're taught to believe that suffering is bad. Well, what if it isn't? It's like, shut up. Oh my God. And the way she tells him to shut up, and it's like, you just regurgitate all this stupid shit that you read and you think that you're deep. And I'm like, thank you for telling him off. We want to tell everyone that we've ever known like this off in the exact same way.
Yeah, she's my favorite.
She's definitely my favorite as well. And even, you know, her interaction with the JFK conspiracy guy, you know, where he's, you know, I he's got this amazing title for his book, Profiles in Cowardice. This book that he has been talking about writing for like 6 years. And he's like, well, and none of these are as thorough as my book, which is blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, you wrote one of these? Like, perfectly willing to read his book, perfectly willing to listen. He's like, not yet. And you're like, oh my God, then shut up.
Exactly.
Yeah, apparently,
but that's another.
That guy.
I'm sorry.
Apparently that guy was actually a JFK conspiracy theorist, and like was just riffing, like was like this is like early mumblecore in terms of just like it was like and go.
Have either one of you ever been to Dealey Plaza on a weekend?
Cannot say that I
Oh
have.
dear God. It
No.
is. I was there over a weekend, and it was, it was the first time that I had been to Dallas, so I wanted to see it. It's, historic. There's also the one of the filming locations for Phantom of the Paradise is right across the street, so I had to go see that. And there were dozens of conspiracy theorists with their handmade zines and their poster boards with all of their research and information. And this guy is perfect in his description of what these conspiracy theorists will go off on and their desperation for an audience. And that's another aspect of this movie that I think Linklater gets perfectly, that so many of us are desperate for an audience, but at the same time, so many of us are also desperate for authenticity and something genuine, that we are happy to be an audience. The amount of patient people listening, everything from the cab driver to the guy that's walking with the guy talking about the guy in the Batman shirt talking about Mars, and the woman listening to the guy talking about his book that he hasn't written yet, and the the thief that gets invited over to the house of the old man.
I freaking love
I
that
love
guy.
that guy.
Or like
Yeah,
that.
and you're like, everybody either wants an audience or they want to be told something they haven't heard before. And when each of those people get together, it's very satisfying. There's something very satisfying about this movie in that aspect. And for me, there's something very sweet about the fact that the people who seem to want an audience always meet up with the people who seem to want to listen to something original.
Yeah.
And that's the best part about the bridge guy and his ex-girl, I'm assuming ex-girlfriend now, is that what he wants an audience, but he's not saying anything original. All he's saying is something contrary to somebody else's original concept, which is why she yells at him and tells him off about it and tells him how disingenuous he's actually being by thinking he's deep by just regurgitating something that he read and then saying the opposite. And yeah, she's my favorite throughout this whole thing. And I also very much do like the girl who did just get out of the mental hospital, who is talking to the guy who has the band, and the woman whose name I can't think of off the top of my head, but the one who strangely became the face of this movie. Her name is Teresa Taylor. And
Oh, is this the Madonna Passmere one?
Yeah,
Or?
her name's Teresa Taylor, and she had been a drummer with the Butthole Surfers. And yeah, the Madonna Pap smear. And my friend Johnny and I, whenever we say the word stole, we always say stolt, in reference to some asshole stole one from me. So for whatever reason, she became the face of this movie. When you look at the cover of the movie poster, the cover of the videotape, to the cover of the Criterion DVD, to the cover of the book. And the book is interesting because it like turns this into a script, and you're reading it thinking you're going to find a plot somewhere, but no, it's still just a script for this.
Still Slacker.
It's her. It's Teresa. And so, and as much as I love her and I love the girl who comes out of the mental hospital, because first of all, when I was a kid, she had what I thought was the absolute perfect hairdo. I tried for that hairdo so many times. It's just really hard to do when you have glasses. And I loved her groundedness of being back in the real world and just being so willing to absorb the real world again after going through whatever it is she went through. And we don't know exactly what it was. And I love how everyone talks about where she's been as just a fact. There's no judgment, there's no making fun of her. There's just, oh yeah, I've heard you were at this place. Okay. And then everybody just sort of moves on with that. And I love that for her, that she's in a world like that, that's not going to hear, oh, you were in the mental hospital, then stop talking to her. There's something about that I just really love for that character.
I feel
Yeah.
like I am forming a thesis about this movie as we talk, that the movie itself expresses a desire for an authenticity and for a conversation that is sort of the basic appeal of the movie unto itself, that it is so authentic and so perfectly quotable. Like, it's exactly what like a culture that was desperate for like a meme culture was looking for, as you pointed out, in terms of like just how quotable it was. And it was a movie that was, here is just people to relate to and just to sort of vibe with over the course of it, in a way that like I think that art is currently looking for in the form of like things like podcasts and so forth. Like, why are people tuning in to this episode of this show? It's because they kind of want to just vibe with us, probably to a certain degree, because we've been doing this for 180 episodes at this point. Like, hopefully part of the reason is because people kind of enjoy the sort of the energy of the show. And I would argue that Slacker is sort of being like, do you sort of enjoy this energy? We've got an hour and a half of it. Here you go. And that the movie itself is presenting a world where the characters long for that the same way as we, the audience, do.
Right, exactly. And we find out too that sometimes what we're looking for is authenticity, and sometimes what we're looking for is just a way to connect to another person on a new level. Because I mean, if you go back to the thief and the old man, and they get back to the house, and the daughter's like, so did he tell you this story? Like, he's just telling stories. They're not
Mhm.
always true, but
Yeah.
that's not always the point. The point is that someone connected with somebody else that wouldn't necessarily be someone that you would assume that the other would connect with. You wouldn't necessarily think, oh, I'm going to talk to the, I'm going to expect that the person who is being robbed is going to just take a walk with the person robbing. There's
Yeah.
the absurdity of that. There's a human authenticity to that, where it's like, hey, here's something you can take. These stories I have, they're they're
Yeah.
about as
Yeah.
valuable as whatever stupid crap I might have in my house that has newspaper clippings pasted to the walls. You know, it's, you may not be able to sell this for money, but you are going to have an experience, and sometimes a genuine experience is priceless. What does Cameron Crowe say in Almost Famous, the Lester Bang, he wrote, Lester Bangs is the only true currency in this world is what two people share when they're uncool. Just there's, an experience with another person is actually valuable, especially the ones that you wouldn't expect to have when you have, young slacker dude and older man that you would think in other movies would not get along, or one would hate the other one, but that just they have a genuine 5-minute interaction that is going
Yeah.
to be memorable for all of us.
There's this part of me that wants to be like far out deep, man, because that's sort of like the vibe of this movie to a certain degree. But it's true. Like, the dynamics between these characters are why we come to this movie, to sort of see these strange pairings that are snippets of time that are intentional. Like, this movie is shot on, I mean, it's shot on a bunch of different formats, but it's shot on film, and it was shot for not a lot of fucking money. It was shot, like, most of the people were working for free with deferred payments, basically, if the movie ever got purchased, which it did. And so a lot of people got paid ultimately
Yes.
to work on it. But the initial shooting budget was only $23,000.
And that doesn't, and this is back in the day when we're shooting on film and you have to get film developed, and that is not
Yes.
free. This is not digital video. This is not, hey, let's make a movie on my phone. This is not, hey, let's make a movie on even a high 8 digital tape or something like that. We're talking film, get it developed. I mean, that's why Clerks was in black and white. At the time, black and white film was cheaper than color and cheaper to develop.
Right.
So there is a lot of technical cost for this. So you notice everybody's probably just wearing their own clothes. There's probably no hair and makeup
Yeah.
budget. The budget probably went to like catering and film development.
Yeah, I mean, it was
Yeah.
it was an incredibly frugal movie, and that meant that, again, just to sort of close out the point on the conversations, like that meant that there was a labor of love going into every single moment of the movie, because every second literally cost money. This movie was an incredibly tight budget on that one, so all of those scenes mattered enough to Linklater to include them in this movie and to shoot them in the first place. It's not like like modern mumblecore movies where you can just like let the DV tape or let your phone just continue recording for odd infinitum amounts of time and then cut it down. Like this was as long and lethargic and sort of like easygoing as a style of movie as it was. Everything had to be considered because it is extremely expensive when you're doing film.
Yeah.
Now, that said, they got, like, once the movie was picked up, they certainly were able to blow it up from 16 to 35 millimeter and not have, other people paid for it all. So the process, it's the same situation as like as El Mariachi, where it's like, yeah, there's a budget that everyone talks about as being like, yeah, this was, he paid for it all with just donating blood at his little local blood banks or having experiments done on him. In this scenario, it's like, yeah, he put this budget together of $23,000 and shot this movie. A lot of people were like very explicitly being held off on getting paid, and a lot of services were not being paid for, and a lot of stuff was being shot very guerrilla. This is the fun thing about talking about movies like this. They didn't have permits for the majority of what they shot. They just sort of like were there and just filmed, and if anyone got in the way, they just sort of like talked their way out of it or like moved until they could come back and shoot later, which I have done those kind of guerrilla filmmaking situations, and they're fun and they're exciting, and they're also not the kind of thing that like is particularly professional, but it's what you do when you're trying to make a movie on $23,000.
Yeah, that's not a lot. That's not a lot of being able to come back to it. That's not a lot of, you're not paying a lot of editors or cinematographers or, crane shots or anything like that. That's not a lot of money. And so sometimes when you have a small budget, you sort of start small, but in the case of this movie, it starts small, but then as you can see that it just completely branches out. If you think about all the other paths that everybody could have taken or stayed at the bus station and wherever this movie could have gone, you start thinking about that after this movie. You're thinking, okay, what if he did stay at the bus station? What if we went to that show? What if we had robbed somebody? I love that where he just throws the gun back at his friend. This doesn't work.
Yeah.
What if all these things would have happened? What did happen to Paul who moved out? What if we had followed Paul? Those kinds of questions stick with you after this movie, along with the quotes, along with who was your favorite, along with what was your favorite little vignette. I mean, because these are almost just little vignettes here that just kind of, little 6-degree themselves throughout the entire movie.
Oh
That's
yeah,
just who's your favorite, what's your favorite, what are you quoting, and who are you still thinking about? And it's a hard question. What is this movie about is an incredibly difficult question. And it is about living at this time at a certain age. And there's not even one age in here. We have the older guy who is being robbed, and then you have the young kids who are selling the sodas. There's various ages throughout this. I mean, it is mostly people from like 18 to maybe 25. Because
yeah.
that's who
The nature
Linklater
of
knew at the
independent
time.
productions
It's
are, yeah.
mostly those people, but it's people at this time, at this age, in this place, living their lives. And
Yeah.
there's nothing extraordinary about their lives, but there's also nothing particularly ordinary about their lives either. It's what does Doctor Who say? I've traveled the galaxy and I've never met anybody who wasn't important. And this movie sort of shows us that even the most ordinary life can be fascinating and entertaining. We don't often think about people who are unemployed students that are deciding whether or not they should try to find a job or where they should go or if they should go back to school as the most fascinating people, but they are fascinating in this and they do keep us entertained and we do stick with this, and there's part of me that wonders how much of a commentary Linklater was making at the time, because at the time people talked a lot about how Generation X, being the MTV generation, had no attention span. But we obviously had the attention span for something like this that is not linear, that is not plot driven. We can, yes, it's, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes with everybody. And it's not just 5 minutes, but it's just small amounts of time.
Right.
But we can follow that. It's a different type of storytelling that the core audience for this movie had no trouble following. And that was one thing we talked about because, like I said, when I saw this movie, I did see it with a class and we discussed it as a class the next day after we went to the theater to see it. And one of the questions we asked ourselves was, when did we stop hoping for a plot? It's like, when did we realize there wasn't going to be a plot? And when did we stop hoping for one? And once we realized that this was going to be something different, because I'd never seen anything like this before. And once we realized that there wasn't going to be a plot, that person A is going to interact with person B and then person C and person C, by the time we get to person G, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to wind up back at person B. Like you were saying, Case, this movie does not come full circle.
Nope.
This just, it's an arbitrary wake up and go to sleep point, And so we realized that we did not, once we knew to stop expecting it, we were perfectly fine without wanting it. We didn't feel like we needed the plot. We didn't feel like we felt like we were missing out on not having a plot. We were just so interested in what's going to be next and who are we going to meet next. Not necessarily what's going to happen next, but who are we going to meet next? And it was very quick. It was very quick for all of us. It was probably, I'm trying to think of, probably around the time that the hit and run guy gets arrested, and then we never see him again. So, we realize that this movie is not about this hit and run, because it seems like it's going to be. This guy gets let off of a cab and then boom, there's a hit and run. And you're thinking, oh, is that what this movie's going to be all about? But no, it's not. And once we realize that there's traditional storytelling elements here that aren't going in a traditional way, we were like, oh, okay, there's nothing to expect. So there's nothing to predict. And we can just let the movie happen. And we were all very happy with that. We were all really interested in this type of thing because I don't think a lot of us had ever seen anything like this before. I know I certainly hadn't.
Well, I mean, and there aren't a lot of movies like that. And I'm kind of surprised when I look at it that this movie didn't benefit from some sort of technological shift in terms of making it popular. Like there's oftentimes like a moment where like the democratization of creativity like is linked to a means becoming available to people. And while there's certainly a degree of it in terms of like film cameras were getting less expensive and you could borrow one or lease one or things like that while making this movie, like I'm surprised that like there wasn't a release part of it that like this seems like a perfect movie for DVDs with chapters, like you can just like skip to the scenes that you really want to watch if you want to watch it that particular way, which I'm sure is why the Criterion Collection exists and why people really like purchased it. It just is interesting to me, because like this movie has, such this like flowing kind of structure to it. And like we've alluded to, like such a large like cast of people involved and cast and crew. It made sense why it thrived in its small scale, like when it first was released in Austin. It ran at the Dolby Theater, and it just ran continuously because there were just like people who wanted to see it because they were in it. And this is before like you could have like YouTube or something like that where it's just like a hosting site for it. Like you needed a place to show it. Hell, I mean, it's like not even like physical home media existed, but like not in the way that like people had easy ability to generate like en masse, like lots of copies for everyone at this point. So like showing it in a theater was honestly one of the ways for it to work. Where it surprises me is that it continued to be popular when it was picked up. I mean, it goes to Sundance, or not Sundance, it goes to South by Southwest, pardon me, and it does really like it blows up, but it's just fascinating, I guess, is what I keep coming around to. Like, it's such a weird movie, and it's one that I enjoy, but it is so weird, and like I can't quite put my finger on why it was a hit, but I get it, like it is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it would be something a that was a hit movie when you're thinking about like what the hit movies were at the time. Things like Dances with Wolves was huge and everywhere at the time. And when you think like of those two things compared to each other, you're like, how,
Yeah.
but it's because as this movie shows us, there's space for so many different types of stories out there in the world. There were other movies this year that were just sort of, like I said, stories about weirdos. Wild at Heart came out the same year as well. And then you also had John Waters' Crybaby was another one, but
Mm-hmm.
we also had
Yeah.
like I think like Goodfellas and Back to the Future 3 and stuff. So it was kind of all over the place as to what were hits, but even one of the biggest movies that came out in 1990 was Misery, which is again a very small movie about two people. And we just sort of started proving that movies do not have to be grandiose to be grand, I guess, for lack of a better term. I don't mean to sound that
Right.
right, but that's
Yeah.
just a lack of a better term.
Yeah. I think also this film, I think, and we've touched on this before, I think being about a little bit about human connection, right? Like this is like the most thematic thing in it is like these connections, like kind of bring everyone together. I think like in general, like even now, I feel like watching it this many years later, I think that automatically kept me drawn to the film, right? Like it's like there's something interesting in just watching people connect with each other. And so like even though it is a time capsule, right? Like if you there's some movies that you're like, oh, this is like timeless, it's not really dated. No, this movie is filled with references and it's very much a time capsule of its time. But it's still there's still something there at the core because it's just about people, it's about humanity. And so it's very easy to kind of latch on to one person or another and kind of go through the journey with it. And so that in its own way makes it kind of timeless, even though it is so specific to its time.
Yeah, it plays to Linklater's ability to always just capture a moment and have you feel like you belong in that moment in the movie. He really loves structure and he really loves temporal settings for things. So he loves period pieces, and the things that are contemporary are always like so of their time as opposed to being timeless, but they feel so inviting in a way that like you just feel like you're a part of it.
Exactly. Like I said, I felt at the age that I saw this movie when this came out, I was not the age of a lot of the kids in this, but was a lot of us, a lot of them in us. We could see ourselves in them. We could see ourselves being them. We could see our older brothers and sisters in them. We can see the people that the upperclassmen in them, people we'd met on campus in them. And so there's something relatable about these people, even if their situations aren't exactly like yours.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it doesn't matter that you can't relate necessarily to any individual person one to one. What matters is that you feel like you should be able to, especially like the general vibe of the people in this thing. And vibe is kind of a good word to describe a lot of this movie. Like you come away from it being like, yeah, I understand these freaks. These are some weird fuckers that I get. It's the way to sort of approach this movie. And Linklater is really good at doing that. Like Xan, your experience of this movie, it resonates for me in terms of my experience of Dazed and Confused. And I know that's sort of like my go-to is like my favorite Linklater movie, but like it's one where I was like a sophomore in high school, and I was cognizant of the fact that like it was a different era and a different location than where I was growing up with like the sort of like strict household. Like I went to a prep school, like it's a very different kind of vibe, but like I felt like very like envious and like welcomed by the people of Dazed and Confused, and it sort of it resonates to me like that was my Linklater movie that had that sort of vibe that is similar to how this movie was that to you, Xan.
Yeah, it was. And that's not to say that I didn't, that the vibe of Dazed and Confused did not also resonate with me, because 93, like I said, 93, I was the same age as the seniors were in Dazed and Confused, even though I was born the same year that it took place. And there really hadn't been that much of a change in how kids interact with each other by that point. We had computers, and we were starting to get email, and we had video games at home as opposed to the video arcade. But we didn't have social media, we didn't have texting, we didn't have cell phones, anything like that. Most of us wouldn't even think about having cell phones until X-Files premiered. My friend Shelly and I literally referred to cell phones as Mulder phones when they first came out.
I love that.
And so we were still had to connect with our friends in person in that same way. And Sam, you were saying earlier that young people still sort of connect with each other in similar ways, even if it's in different mediums. And that's very true. That we think about us older generation people think about how we don't see kids in parks anymore, and how I have kids in my neighborhood, but I don't see them like walking around with each other. I don't see them congregating a lot of places, but they're definitely congregating on headsets on video games. Things like
Yeah.
it's just a different arena for them. It doesn't mean they're not congregating, it doesn't mean they're not talking, it doesn't mean they're not sharing things. But for at the time, in 93, 94, 94 is the year I graduated high school. And you really would go to parties because somebody said, "Hey, did you hear that we're gonna, party at the Moon Tower?" type of a situation.
Right.
That still very
Right.
much happened. You could still.
Well, and like that was still sort of the way for us. Like
Yeah, for you
I
guys,
was
for
early
sure.
cell
Yeah.
phone era. Like I don't want to like present this as being like such a generational leap, but it was just like one where like I knew that like me growing up in like the like cusp of the millennia in terms of like when I got my driver's license and everything. Like yeah, we had cell phones with some texting, but it was just that like my parents were more restrictive, and like we didn't have like I grew up outside of the DC area. Like we didn't have places to go to like party that way. Also, I was not cool. We should be very clear about that detail. So I wasn't like being invited to the parties at the Moon Tower.
I was being invited to parties with other non-cool kids. I went to, well, I mean, non-cool in a cultural sense. I grew up as a nerdy geek back before nerdy geekdom was fun and popular. So I went to alternative high school and I did theater. So, and we had our own parties, but it wasn't, we weren't we weren't hanging out on the football field with the football
Sure,
players who had to sign their
Yeah.
sobriety contract.
Just let me say that you were cooler than me in high school.
Gotcha. Well, was I cooler? Not
It's not a
necessarily.
competition case.
Did I
It's not a competition.
was I able to find other weirdos more easily? Possibly.
That's probably true
Yeah.
because again, I went to a private all boys school, so that usually
Uh,
is why I didn't really find that many freaks of my ilk, and the few that I did, I kept close to my chest.
yeah, I was lucky because I went to an art school for high school. So like I went to LaGuardia. So everyone was kind of someone that would have been beat up in their zone school.
That's kind
So,
of the
you
school
know,
I
we
went to. I went to an alternative high school that was like that. It was not just, artists and creative types, but it was also like super math geeks and computer nerds that like created the entire computer network system for my high school. So it was all of the gamut of the not jock cheerleader crowd. It was all of us.
yeah, I mean, like teams weren't even popular in my school. Like
Oh
the
yeah.
basketball team was begging people to show up. I think it was like the senior year, one of my friends was like, I'm in fencing. Can you come to our match? And I was like, we have a fencing team? Like I had no idea.
We had a fencing
Like
team.
I was
Yeah, we sure did.
I was like, "What? There are sports at this school?" Like, I remember, the small percentage of people who were, like, athletic being like, "Hey, do you wanna join the track team?" And I'm like, "No, I'm going to join the musical theater club. What are you talking about?"
Why are
Like,
you
it
joining
was
the track
just
team?
such it's like, "Why are you doing" like, it's like, "No, but we need, like, 4 more people so it can actually exist." Like,
Mhm.
that's the kind of school, like, I went to, so finding weirdos, very easy.
Yeah,
I mean,
that
like
sounds very similar to my experience as well. There was
yeah.
no.
I remember one kid ruined his clothes because he decided it would be hilarious if he came in if he came into school and he was dressed in duct tape, but he taped it to his actual clothes,
Yeah,
and then
no.
he couldn't get it off,
Never
so he
wearing
had to
those
throw away
again.
that whole
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
But to be fair, his skin is not ripped
Mm,
raw, so
true.
maybe a
No,
smarter
that's
play.
true. He did, yes, putting on his clothes was much better than that, and he did make a point. I mean, like and he did it in response to a bunch of other kids who decided to come in 2 guys came in dressed as Girl Scouts so that they could basically promote their other friend as, like, an amazing person. I don't know why. All
Yeah,
I know is my school was filled with weirdos.
Yeah, my school was filled with weirdos too, so yeah. It's all about access to other weirdos, not necessarily your level of coolness.
no, it's
Yeah.
true. I went to literally the same high school as Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, so
Whoa!
yeah, like in terms of like, it's a miracle that I got out with the sanity that I did.
You have all your calendars too? Hmm.
Who keeps a
It was
calendar in high
required in that
school?
high school.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
know it. Weird shit on that one. But yeah, so long story short, I was not as cool as y'all, or at least I didn't find my nerds. And it's important to find the freaks to let your flag fly
Oh,
with.
yeah.
That I think is really important. And Austin was a great community in the 90s for that. It was a really strong, vibrant community of artists who supported a local artist in creating this movie on the cheap. And then when it got picked up and it launched this man's career, there seems to be a consistent like love for this movie, like consistent screenings and like periodic, like annual kind of like venue releases in Austin. So it's a movie that has a lot of legs to it. It's in the Criterion collection. Like it's a beloved movie, and I'm really glad I finally watched it.
Yeah.
I can't get over that I hadn't. Like I said, it was just like kind of Titanic in like in my mind palace, and I wasn't sure how to like approach it. But Zan, you gave me the inspiration to like finally like sit down and watch it, and I do really appreciate that.
I'm happy you did, and I'm happy you enjoyed it, and again, it is that sometimes a movie's reputation precedes it, but that doesn't mean it's inaccessible, if that makes sense. It doesn't mean you have to. This is definitely a movie that shows you that not everything has to be perfect and where you think it needs to be for it to be something special.
Yeah, raw is a really good word to describe this movie. Like even though it is surprisingly well scripted, considering the weird format for, like, again, it wouldn't exist. Like
And it
the
is
movie this
scripted. I mean, it is a scripted.
it is,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, like that's the thing. You would think that this is a modern mumblecore movie from the way that it is structured and the way that characters talk in it. But it is actually like fully scripted and like really well rehearsed, which we didn't really talk about because this is more of a movie about vibes, and this has been a call about vibes, which I am all about. So yeah, it was a movie that put a lot of effort into making it look so casual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It takes a lot to look this nonchalant, frankly. But it I think that's a genius of it. There were, baby steps getting to this, of the whole, it doesn't have to be a bombastic hero story to mean something, and Rocky taught us that. And it doesn't have to be linear to have stories about the types of weirdos we might have met in something like Midnight Cowboy. There've been hints of this kind of ordinary storytelling. I no, I don't. It's not even ordinary. Just the lives of regular ordinary people. Ordinary people, of course, a movie in itself of ordinary people going through an unfortunately extraordinarily tragic situation. It doesn't even take that to make ordinary people an interesting, to make, lowercase ordinary people interesting in the way that the movie uppercase ordinary people needs to make that story go through. You compare what the characters in that go through talking about mental health compared to what the characters in this go through talking about mental health. You have a lot of people who obviously have mental health issues. You have somebody that we are talking to that has gotten out of mental hospital, and I'm pretty sure that the "you should quit" lady is not in fact a medical doctor.
No, I never took that to be
Don't think she
a
actually, yeah,
reliable
don't think she
resource
actually
on
is.
that one.
But she's allowed to just exist in the same space as other people. And I think that's a main thing in this movie, is just that, the a simple story has a place to exist just like every other story does. It should be allowed to exist. And that's one of the coolest things about this movie, is just that it's, even when you think of something like Seinfeld, it's a show about nothing. Yeah, but it's a show about nothing and how rich people interact with each other, and
And interact with each other.
and
Seinfeld, like
yeah,
bringing up Seinfeld. Seinfeld has that kind of structure at the beginning, but it always comes back
but it
around.
always
This is
comes
the
full,
movie.
right. It always comes
Yeah,
full
this
circle.
is a movie where it doesn't come full circle. This movie just keeps on going, and you have wormed your way through the entirety of the populace of Austin.
Right.
But you are never meeting back up with Richard Linklater at the start of that movie.
No, you're never meeting back up with it again. And yes, you don't have to have a linear plot to be an interesting story, but you also don't have to have famous people either. You can
Right.
just ordinary people who just happen to live in Austin at this period of time, who some of them do eventually become Richard Linklater, which is an amazing feat, but that's not where we started. I mean, it kind of is where we started in this movie, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. We start the movie with Richard Linklater.
Start the movie with Richard Linklater, but that's not what I mean when I say we're not starting with Richard Linklater.
Right. No. I get you on that one. No, it's a movie which it launched him to a career success, and it helps with like making Austin such a weird place that it became, and has kind of lost some of that luster at this point as people talk about it. But this was certainly part of creating that allure, the same way that like Rent is like part of making like the Lower East Side and like Alphabet City like have this like cool kind of vibe to it, like because it exists. Like this kind of exists to sort of create that vibe for Austin and that allure for it all. So again, I'm really glad to have watched it. Sam, how does this rank on your chores scale? Like, would you put this on and do some chores, or where are you feeling on that one?
Oh, that is.
You know what? I feel, yeah, I have a chore scale
Wait, did
for
you
this
say? I'm
podcast.
sorry. Did you say Xan or did you say Sam?
I said Sam.
Okay, sorry about that. I will
Sam.
shut up.
No,
No,
it's okay.
very confusing.
Yeah, I misheard that. I will shut up and Sam, please talk.
My scale on this is actually like I actually don't think this is a great movie for doing chores to. Not because you couldn't just have it in the background and watch your favorite moments, which you definitely could. But I definitely think that it's possibly an incredibly distracting film. I think that you'd probably be distracted. And so I don't think you'd get anything done because it's actually quirky and sweet and deep. And yeah, so no chores with this. Just watch it. Just watch this film.
I think that's incredibly fair. I think the only scenario where it could be a chores movie is if you had it like completely memorized and like had specific ones you cared about and didn't care about.
Yeah.
But
You'd have
you
to
would,
know.
yeah,
You'd
you'd have to
have to have the
know.
rhythm. Like it would be like, you know how like when you ride the same commute every day so you can fall asleep and wake up still just before your stop? Like that's how you'd have to know this film in order to actually do chores to it. So I'm saying no chores. No chores unless you've seen it over 100 times and have memorized everything that every ridiculous person in this movie and not ridiculous person in this movie has to say. Yeah, just watch the film. Enjoy it. Have a snack. Put your phone away. This is not a movie for phones.
That is true.
Yeah.
This is not the kind of movie
Jump
that
into
supports
the
phones.
time capsule and just enjoy the journey.
Indeed. Well, I enjoyed this journey. Xan, thank you for taking us on this journey. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming along with this whim of mine here, because it is definitely I do, as much as I love this movie, it is not one that I pick up that often because Sam's right. If you try to put this on while you're doing chores, you're going to stop doing chores and you're going to find yourself watching this. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, so and
Yeah.
so's about to come up, and oh, that guy is about to show up, and oh, it's Madonna Pap smear time, and you're going to get sucked into it, even though there's no plot to get sucked into. You're going to get sucked into the people. So it's not one that I watch a ton of the time, but I always relish the opportunities I have to watch this one. So I'm glad you guys had me for this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is always like one of the ones that I wanted to talk about just because of the reputation for it. Like the fact that it was like such a micro budget movie that inspired Kevin Smith, like was always a reason I wanted to talk about it. So I'm really glad that we had this excuse and that we were able to get you on for this. Where can people find you and follow you if they enjoyed listening to the words that came out of your mouth?
If they enjoyed me, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And if you would like to hear more of my ramblings about cinema, you can join me and my podcasting partners, DJ Nick and Rachel Friend, on our podcast, Gold Standard, the Oscars podcast. We had an idea to do all of the Best Picture winners from the inception of the award with Wings up to our most recent one. We are caught up. We did an episode for Anora. And as we wait for Best Picture of 2025 to be announced, we are just going through our list of what we think are quintessential cinema gems and what our listeners think are quintessential cinema. So, we started out as once a year, we're an Oscars podcast. And then the rest of the time we are a quintessential cinema, maybe should have won an Oscars podcast. And then on a completely 180 of discussing cinema, my other podcasting partner, Charles Skaggs, and I do a podcast called Drunk Cinema, where we watch our favorite movies, which are usually culty type weird movies. And we watch them over our favorite adult beverages and discuss them and record that discussion for your entertainment. And those can be found wherever podcasts are found. And if you are looking to find me on any social media outlets, your best bets would be Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, or Substack, and on all of those, my handle is Udinax19.
Yes, because we all love Xanadu over here. Wonderful stuff. So yeah, no, people should check out your shows. Gold Standard I've been on, which is how this conversation started, because I was on talking about Everybody Wants Some. We were talking about Linklater there and how it's a movie that I really like, even though it's like empirically like not his best movie.
It was weird to have like, even though it is that way, and we talked about this, even though we do see those characters in Dazed and Confused, it was kind of weird to have a Linklater movie that was all jocks. That was very different for me. And that was the first time I'd seen that. So I was glad that you had brought that one. So I got a chance to watch that one as well.
Yeah, so we're introducing each other to movies, and it's a fun time. At one point, a friend of the show, Mitch Pompayak, and I had talked about doing a Richard Linklater podcast called Linklateurs. And so every now and then I get to like live up a little bit of that aspiration. So I do very much appreciate you coming on, Xan.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sam, where can people find you and follow you?
They can find me here every time we drop an episode, and I am lurking on our Discord. You may not see me, I may not respond to you, but I see everything you're saying. So definitely there. And other than that, if you have any complaints about anything I said, although I think today I was brilliant and I didn't say anything to offend anyone, but should you find that I am incorrect on that, you can find Case at...
Well, you can find me on most social platforms at Case Aiken, except for Instagram, where I'm holding on for dear life to my AIM screen name from high school, and that is Quetzalcoatl5, Quetzalcoatl5, because I was pretentious in high school as well. But yeah, you can find me on most of those social platforms at Case Aiken. You can find me on the Discord at Case Aiken as well. That is a really great place to come chat with us. So come to the Discord. You can also find me on the Patreon for Certain POV. That is a really cool place that we're doing all kinds of content. I'm putting out essays weekly on just random thoughts and on D&D topics twice a week, 2 essays a week, as well as getting sneak previews and getting shout outs on our shows. Shout outs like the people who are on our executive producer list. So let me give those names right now. And that is Micah McCaw, Carter Hallett, Sean Muir, Lee Gregor, Memento Young, Logan Crowley, Joe Mastropiero, Casey and Nancy Aiken, Adam Samter, and Keith Lettinen. These are wonderful people who joined at the executive producer tier. We would appreciate if you joined at that tier. That would be wonderful. But even if you don't, even at the free tier, we are putting out a lot of really cool material. So even at the free tier, come join the Patreon. It's a really great time. And I really appreciate you all and just wanted to shout them out. Otherwise, we've got a ton of great stuff going on the Certain POV network. You should check out all the stuff that's going up on our YouTube channel. As of the time of this recording, we just cracked 30,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, which is a ridiculous number of people from considering where we were just a few months ago. So that's a really cool milestone for us. So statistically, you're probably watching this on YouTube. You should check out the sister shows that are part of the Certain Point of View podcast network. A big one that I want to shout out right now is a new show that we just launched, and that is Trade School, which is a show where every episode a guest host comes on and for 5 to 15 minutes talks about a comic book that they loved and why they loved it. And so it could be the idea is a trade paperback, but it could be an arc that is available online. Regardless, the goal is, here's a trade paperback, here's why I love it, and go. And that's the show. So you should check out Trade School. It's running weekly every Wednesday, and it is a really fun time. I would highly recommend it. It's really fun just listening to why people have these like deep, passionate feelings about particular comic books. But on that note, I think that kind of covers everything that we have to talk about. Sam, what have we got going on next time?
Next time, we'll be talking about Highlander 2, The Quickening. But until then, if you enjoyed this, pass it on.
Thanks for listening to Certain Point of View's Another Pass podcast. Don't miss an episode. Just subscribe and review the show on iTunes. Just go to certainpov.com.
Another Pass is a Certain POV production. Our hosts are Sam Alicea and Case Aiken. The show is edited by Sophia Ricciardi. Our logo and episode art is by Case Aiken. Our intro theme is by Vin Macri, and our outro theme is by Matt Brogan.
All right, Josue, let's go through our new comic day stack. We have a lot to review.
I know. Maybe we've gone too far.
Well, let's see. Marvel, of course. DC.
I got Image, Dark Horse,
Black Mask, Boom, IDW.
Aftershock, Vault, of course, Mad Cave,
Oni, Valiant, Scout.
Magma, Behemoth.
Wow, that's a lot. Well, all we need now is a name for our show. We need a name for our show about reviewing comic books every week. Something clever, but not too clever.
Like a pun? It's kind of cheesy.
Yeah, it's something that seems funny at first, but we might regret later on as an impulsive decision a few dozen episodes in.
Yeah, we'll think of something.
Join Keith and Josue for We Have Issues, a weekly show reviewing almost every new comic released each week. Available on Geek Elite Media and wherever you listen to your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.